At 9:37 a.m., Gate C8 of Westbridge International Airport hummed with the usual morning rhythm. The staccato click of rolling suitcases, the low murmur conversations, and the disembodied voice of an airline announcer. A scene so familiar it was almost invisible. Yet, one woman stood with a stillness that defied the chaos. She was black, in her mid-30s, dressed in a sharp blazer, dark jeans, and low heels. Her posture was erect, her hands calmly at her sides. Her presence was not loud, but it was unsettling to someone who saw it as an anomaly. Within minutes, 2 airport police officers approached. "Ma'am, step aside for additional screening," one of them said, his tone a practiced blend of authority and routine. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze and asked, "On what grounds?" "You were reported as appearing agitated, potentially threatening." The second officer clipped the word threatening, landing with a weight that made a few nearby passengers turn to look. A woman with a coffee cup paused. A man reached for his phone. Janelle Rivers, a federal agent on an active mission, sighed quietly. Her voice, though calm, was infused with control power that should have made the officers hesitate. "Are you sure this is the protocol you want to follow today?" she asked. They didn't listen. They led her away, their hands brushing her shoulder with the casual authority they reserved for suspects. Her ID remained untouched in her bag. No rights were read. No supervisor was called. To them, she was just a profile, a data point in a pattern of bias they had long since stopped seeing as unjust. They had no idea she was a federal agent. They certainly didn't know she was the one watching them, and that she had come to arrest a man far above their pay grade. For the past 6 months, Janelle Rivers had been operating under deep cover for the Office of the Inspector General, OIG, a division within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. Her mission was to dismantle a toxic network of misconduct inside the airport's law enforcement unit. At the center of this web sat Chief Nolan Price, a figure whose public image as a clean-cut enforcer masked years of civil rights violations, racial profiling, and obstruction of justice. Westbridge International had a troubling pattern that didn't make headlines but was glaringly obvious in the data. Black and Latino travelers were detained, questioned, and removed from flights at significantly higher rates than their white counterparts. Janelle had accessed confidential internal affairs reports that painted a chilling picture. A traveler's laptop seized and lost in evidence, a woman interrogated for over 90 minutes without cause, and complaints that mysteriously never made it past a supervisor's desk. The most damning evidence came from a former K-9 handler who had resigned after witnessing his superior order a drug dog to signal on the baggage of specific passengers, always people of color, always recorded as routine inspection. Janelle knew she couldn't simply walk in with a federal jacket and expect cooperation. That's why she played the long game. She booked flights under aliases, changed her appearance, and spent months documenting the airport security process. She had been randomly screened 3 times in a single week, despite her TSA pre-check and global entry status. On one occasion, she had asked a white man in line if he'd ever been pulled aside. "Never," he'd laughed. "I guess I don't look like trouble." The comment was a confirmation, not a surprise. It solidified her understanding of how deeply ingrained the bias had become. She wasn't working alone. A small task force at DHS, 2 digital forensic specialists, and a legal advisor, monitored every report she filed. They cross-referenced her discreetly captured smartwatch footage with existing complaints, and a clear pattern emerged. Unlawful searches, wrongful detainments, missing body camera footage, and a consistent intimidation of female travelers who dared to question authority. What made it worse were the anonymous calls several victims later received, discouraging them from pursuing legal action. This pointed to something bigger: obstruction of justice. The final straw came when a shipment of humanitarian medical supplies was delayed at customs under pretext of enhanced screening. Surveillance showed a man with direct ties to Chief Price giving verbal instructions to hold the shipment. The package was later released, rummaged through, and damaged. It wasn't enough to prove criminal intent, but it was enough for the department to authorize a sealed federal warrant for Chief Nolan Price. The instruction was clear: do not serve it until Janelle had made visual confirmation and gathered live procedural misconduct on the ground. They needed an undeniable moment of exposure. something the press couldn't spin and the union couldn't cover. On the morning of her incident at Gate C8, Janelle had left her badge in her pocket for a reason. She wanted to see how far they would go when they thought she was just another black woman with a boarding pass. She had mapped every hallway, checkpoint, and camera blind spot in Terminal C. She'd studied the rhythm of the airport, the habits of the officers, and the weaponized jargon they used to justify their behavior. The same two officers conducted the majority of random stops. Their reports read like copy-paste templates, non-compliant, raised voice, furtive movements. These phrases, she knew from past investigations, were not meant to describe behavior, but to justify escalation. She had specifically sought out Sergeant Halverson, one of Chief Price's most visible enforcers, needing him to notice her. His recognition would trigger a chain of reactions she could document in real time. Her mission was in motion. Her smartwatch was live. Her audio backup was recording. And the DHS observer was 2 gates over, watching through tinted glasses. As she was led past a scanner and toward a sidewall near a supply closet, Janelle noted the missing body cams. The officers' questions were vague, their stances too close. When Halverson arrived, his voice was louder, more performative now that a small crowd had begun to form. "We receive a report that you were acting erratically near the gate," he announced. "What exactly did the report say?" Janelle asked, tilting her head. He hesitated, then added, "You were seen looking nervous and pacing." That was the moment she knew he was bluffing. She hadn't moved from her place in line for more than 20 seconds. She was being profiled, not protected, and it was all being caught on 3 phones and a live internal feed. When an officer reached for her bag without consent, Janelle's tone shifted. "Do you have probable cause?" she asked, her eyes locking with Halverson's. "Or are you assuming threat based on appearance?" He froze, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, with the legal precision of someone who had spent years reading codes and training officers. The crowd grew. Phones recorded. Whispers rose. Just like that, the airport's nightmare had begun. A black woman detained for nothing visible. Officers escalated without cause, and passengers watching injustice unfold in HD. The humiliation was a calculated part of the plan. Her team needed evidence of racial profiling, improper search procedures, and failure to follow protocol. They were getting all 3. Within minutes, Chief Price walked in like he owned the air in the terminal. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice a practiced, faux calm. In fact, Janelle replied smoothly, "I've been waiting to see you." It was time. Chief Nolan Price stood with practiced authority, but Janelle's composed stillness unsettled him. He tried to reassert control. "We're trying to ensure safety," he said, speaking louder for the crowd. This woman was flagged by TSA for suspicious behavior. "Was I?" Janelle countered, "Because I went through no scanner. I was in line, quiet, cooperative." She took a slow step forward. "Let me ask you, Chief, does suspicious now mean standing still while black?" The comment hit harder than he expected. A few passengers muttered in agreement. An older white officer tried to usher her toward a private room. "For what purpose?" Janelle asked calmly. "Because unless I'm being detained under formal grounds, you have no right to touch me." Her tone was legal, sharp, and fully in control. "Ma'am, this isn't the time to challenge procedure," Price said, irritated now. "It's always the time to challenge illegal conduct, especially in uniform," she countered, her words surgical and precise. Every violation, wrongful detainment, abuse of authority, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, was unfolding in real time, in public view. When another officer attempted to reach for her tote, Janelle's hand moved slightly to block him. "You don't have consent," she said. "And if you touch it, you trigger federal obstruction." Her smartwatch buzzed a confirmation from her team. Price's voice cracked slightly. "You're escalating the situation." "I'm not escalating, Chief." Janelle smiled subtly. "I'm watching you reveal exactly who you are." The narrative had completely shifted. The suspicion was now on them. Then came the fourth ignition point. An officer radio dispatch, and this time, the dispatcher asked something unusual. Confirm the name of the individual. Does it match a current Federal Observer file? Price's face went pale. He barked into the radio. But the dispatcher had already gone quiet. The seed had been planted. Someone upstairs already knew who she was. Janelle reached into her blazer pocket. She didn't brandish a badge, but retrieved a single folded document, a copy of a sealed federal arrest warrant. She didn't show it. She simply let it rest at her side. "This conversation is about to change," she said softly, "and so is your career." Price, in a final act of desperation, ordered his men to remove her. "She's interfering with airport operations. Remove her now." But they hesitated, a deeper doubt having entered the room. And then the final trigger. A woman in a black suit with a DHS pin stepped into the scene. "Agent Rivers," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The van is in place. Command is standing by." Price turned white. The passengers gasped. Cameras lifted again. Janelle didn't gloat. She simply nodded and turned to Price. "You're done lying. You're done covering. You're done hiding behind protocols you abuse." The chief of airport police, once an untouchable figure, looked genuinely afraid. The climax wasn't about her badge or handcuffs. It was about the silence that fell across that terminal when the entire room realized that the woman they had profiled, detained, and humiliated had come to arrest their boss. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of reckoning.